Welcome to the WORKOLOGY podcast, where we discuss the science and art of the workplace, gain powerful insights, resources, and perspectives on the industries of human resources and recruiting. Join your host, Jessica Miller-Merrill, chief blogger of bloggingforjobs.com, for an in-depth and no-holds-barred look into the future of our most powerful business asset, the employee. And now, welcome your host, Jessica, with this podcast episode of WORKOLOGY.
Did you know the first job board was created more than 20 years ago? Over the last 2 decades, employment websites have been a key component of the job hunt. From CareerBuilder to Glassdoor to Monster to Indeed and all of the others, job hunters have been inundated with online career centers. But there's still so much to be said and done, and job boards remain a great candidate source and a way to find qualified job seekers at your company. Our guest today is Jeff Dickey Chassins, also known as the Job Board Doctor. He's a veteran of the job board publishing and e-learning industries. He has worked on with more than, and I can't believe this, 450 job boards?
Yep, that's right.
In human resources and job boards. He's been working in this space since 1994. And he knows this business inside and out. He's going to bring us up to speed on what makes a job board succeed or fail. Welcome to the podcast.
Great, it's great to be here, thanks.
Is there anything that I missed?
No, I think you covered pretty much everything that I'm willing to reveal on at least on the audio. So,
Awesome. Welcome to the WORKOLOGY podcast. Let's get started and talk about what exactly a job board is and isn't. What's the difference between a job board and a job aggregator?
So a job board is a place where job content's stored and candidates can go and look at jobs, review information about companies, apply for jobs, usually through the job board. Sometimes when they hit the apply button, they end up on the employer's page. An aggregator is actually what it sounds like. So it aggregates job content from a bunch of different places. So it'll get job content from a job board, it'll get job content from an employer, maybe get content from different places all over the internet and put it in one place. The real difference from a candidate's point of view is that when you're on a job board, it tends to be a one-click experience. You go, you look at the job, you click, you apply. If you're on an aggregator site, you're probably going to go through 2 or 3 clicks before you end up in the final click.
Do candidates kind of get lost in that, or because they're having to go through 2 or 3 clicks, or does it not necessarily matter to them?
I think there's a percentage of them that definitely get lost. I mean, there's been research done that shows that, anywhere between 15-25% of candidates will click off of an aggregator site and then just sort of disappear. And I think that's what's happening. They end up on an employer site, they never go back, they forget about the other jobs that are listed. And from an employer standpoint, that's probably one of the disadvantages of relying purely on aggregators to get your jobs out there. If you're on an employer site, you can have a company page that highlights what you do, you can have videos, you can have all sorts of stuff, and you can have all your jobs in one nice, neat package, and so you don't lose those candidates.
I wanted to ask you kind of the burning question that I always think about. LinkedIn, is it a social network? Is it a job board? Is it a job aggregator? What do you think? What is LinkedIn?
Well, when I look at sites like LinkedIn that say they're not a job board, I always ask the basic question, how do they make their money? Well, LinkedIn makes most of its money from selling recruiting-related products. So it's a job board. It's a slightly different job board. I call it a job board that has an open resume, so a semi-public resume that essentially lures in recruiters and whatnot. But it's a job board.
What's the value in your mind of a job board? There are so many of them. How do HR and recruiters figure out what works, maybe what one works for them and what doesn't?
Well, I think the first thing that any employer should ask themselves is, what does my candidate look like? What's my target audience? So if you're an engineering firm, you're probably primarily looking for engineering candidates, although you probably have some administrative people and whatnot. If you're a company like Target, you have a whole range of people. And you have to say, well, where are those candidates going to be? Well, it's been shown over and over again in research with job seekers that the job hunt for most job seekers will start on the internet. It usually starts at a search engine, and then it goes from there most commonly to a job board or an aggregator. So you have to look at who you're trying to reach and say, so where are they going to be? So if I'm looking for, let's say, programmers, the most likely place you're going to find them on the internet, the most concentrated place, is going to be a technology-focused site like Dice. So you're going to get more bang for your buck if you go there as opposed to, let's say, an aggregator, if you throw it on Craigslist, or if, and certainly if you just try to rely on your own career site. Most companies are not brands. Most companies are not a Google, they're not a Microsoft, so they don't have people flocking to their site. If you are one of those brands, that's really great. You probably don't need a job board. But for the other 95% of your companies, you need something that's going to help you stand out. That's the second thing that a job board can do that's incredibly effective for employers, is it helps them brand their company against all the other companies out there, and it helps them stand out to a candidate. It's probably one of the most effective forms of employer branding that an employer on average can buy.
Are there any up-and-coming job boards maybe that you're excited about or working with that you think we should know about?
Oh, that's a loaded question. There's lots of really interesting sites that are doing things that are kind of different. So there's a technology site which I find fascinating called Hired. What it really is if you look at it, it looks like a job board, but if you kind of dig into it, what it actually turns out to be is a recruiting firm that's using the job board front to get in there and place people. But you'd be hard pressed to tell the difference from that on that. There's a number of sites that are out there that are using matching technology, which is the idea that if you give them enough information about yourself as a candidate, they can match you up with the right kind of job. And there's so many of those that I'm not even sure I really even want to start talking about it. There's a really interesting site, it's no longer particularly new, called ShiftGig that comes out of Chicago, and it's aimed at the restaurant industry. And the thing that's kind of cool about it is it's sort of a pseudo-social site. It's what I call a mini LinkedIn. So it's a job board, but it's a job board with a twist where the candidates get to put up visual resume, and they have video clips, and the restaurants are doing the same thing. So it's sort of a matchmaking thing, because that's a notoriously hard industry to hire for.
I have had the pleasure of being a follower or a fan of ShiftGig's Instagram account, which is quite interesting. They have some really fun memes, and they get a lot of really interactivity from their job seekers.
Yeah, they're very socially oriented. And one of the sites that I think is most amusing, and I say this slightly with a pun, is called the Muse. It's a relatively new site. It was originally just aimed at millennial women. They're sort of re-pivoting right now and just saying we're aiming at all millennials. But essentially what it is a site that's full of company profiles, which most job boards consider one of the features they offer. This site is very visual. It's all company profiles, and then just happens to list jobs as well.
I like the Muse because they're really content focused too.
Right.
Like, they're all about the blog. They have pretty visuals. They have good web traffic from that standpoint, and are sharing resources for those millennials to come and visit the site. And oh, by the way, check out the company profiles that we have there too.
Right. And I guess there's one final site. It's not new, but I always point people to this because it's an interesting way that job boards have approached keeping their audience when they're no longer interested in getting a job. They got the job, but the job board wants to keep them around. It's a site called Archinect, and it's a community site that's aimed at architects, and it has this whole multiple layers of engagement. So there's places where the architects can put up their portfolios, there's contests, listings, there's of course the job board, which generates the revenue for the site. There's news features, there's all sorts of stuff, and it really sort of becomes a go-to place if you're an architect.
Well, let's take a little bit of a reset here. This is Jessica Miller-Merrill, and you're listening to the Workology podcast powered by Blogging for Jobs. Today's topic is job boards with the Job Board Doctor. You can visit his website at jobboarddoctor.com. What do recruiters need to know about job boards maybe that they've missed? If you could talk to HR recruiters out there and tell them, hey, here's something that you might have missed. For example, when you've talked about Hired, you've also written recently about Guild. You don't call Guild a job board. How are they different?
Well, so Guild is really what I'd call an assessment tool. And there's a number of sites out there that sort of fall into that category where they're offering varying levels of assessment. They do this through games or through tests, or sometimes it's through peer sort of crowdsourcing things. But the idea there is that they are somehow quantifying the candidate in a way that might be hard typically for the HR manager or recruiter who might not be expert in that subject. And then that forms a basis for the recruiting. And most of these companies, if they haven't already, are on their way to monetizing all that data that's out there. Stack Overflow is a classic example of a site that started as a question and answer site, but they started making all their money when they took all those peer assessments of people and turned them into candidates that recruiters could tap.
They have a careers Twitter account that is really active, and I like to participate with them. They share our content, and I find it fascinating that they were a community, and now they're in the job space.
Yeah, and one of the things that, I don't know if you know or not, but Stack Overflow is actually in over 120 different disciplines. It's not just tech. Tech's the most prominent, but they have Stack Overflows for writers and biologists and you name it. And so there's a reason why they got that, I don't know, $100 and something million investment. But
I wonder why Reddit didn't go that direction, right? Like, I think of Reddit, I mean, it's sort of off the wall and wacky, but it has such a good community. Maybe they should add a career section. I don't know, Reddit, if you're out there listening, this might be an opportunity for you.
But you did ask the question about what HR and recruiters should be asking job boards, or maybe things that they don't know. And I think probably the biggest thing I would tell anyone that's in HR recruiting is go to job boards with your problem and say, this is my specific recruiting problem, and don't just sell me job postings and resume access. Because the best job boards out there have a lot more ways to access candidates than just those two methods, and usually they're more effective and more useful for you in terms of finding the people you want and branding your company.
I think the good job boards and most job boards out there, they do want to help, they want to engage, they want to provide a great service and help, solve this problem for recruiters and job seekers, like connecting them together.
Right. Yeah, I view job boards, when they're doing their job right, are matchmakers. So.
Agreed. I read where you wrote about candidates that they're the only thing that make a job board successful. What are some examples of the best branded job boards out there, and who's winning the game when it comes to maybe attracting candidates and hosting their profiles?
Well, I think, we mentioned Stack Overflow before. I'll mention it again. I mean, it's a site that's become incredibly effective in the tech world as sort of being a place that you have to be. You have to have some sort of record there and some activity level there if you want to get certain types of jobs. It's just sort of a given. And the fact that they roll all that information into their candidate profiles, I think, is brilliant. Most job boards in niches, to a certain degree, whether they're sort of old 1990s style traditional boards or there's something very modern like the Muse, are usually a place where candidates in that niche really, really do need to be, because a site like Tax Talent's a good example. It's been around since I want to say 87, 88 in some form or fashion, but they're sort of a cradle to grave supplier of people at the very high level for tax jobs. And if you're not there, you're missing out on a huge part of very lucrative jobs from a very narrow part of the industry, of the tax industry.
One thing I think we've gathered from the conversation so far is that there isn't a one-size-fits-all job board. There's lots of different options in any niche, different features that are important or that provide a service. Certainly the tax job board is an interesting one as well. It's not an area that you would consider until you're looking for somebody who has that kind of expertise. Let's talk a little bit about email, because that seems to be an important part of the job board, particularly like job alerts. Personally, I'm not a fan of email. They can feel very archaic, but it seems to be such a great way to engage the candidate. Tell us a little bit about the job alerts, and then maybe some other ways that job boards are reaching out to their candidate communities.
Sure. Job alerts date back to the dawn of the job board world, and basically they're what they sound like. You sign up, you usually put in some sort of a search string, like I'm looking for marketing jobs in the Kansas City Metro that pay more than $100,000. And you set that up as an alert. The alert goes through the database every night, finds the jobs, groups them up, sends them out to you. Well, the beauty of that, even though it is, like you said, somewhat archaic, the beauty of that from a candidate's perspective is that it's very time efficient. I set it up once, I don't have to mess with it anymore. When I see something I want, I can engage. Otherwise, it takes up very little of my time, and particularly these days where you literally have thousands and thousands of potential job sources, the ability to just set something up and let it run can be a great advantage for the candidate. Now, job boards also have, some job boards have texting for certain, instead of job alerts. So you can actually have the jobs texted to them, which can be pretty nice when you're in a competitive field. For example, this is really popular in the entertainment industry, acting, that sort of stuff. These things come up. One of the other things that job boards do, and this kind of falls in the role of employer branding, but it can be really useful to candidates too, particularly when they don't know about companies, is they will do webinars or they'll do a direct targeted email to certain subsets for a particular employer. And they're talking about particular jobs that are open, they're talking about the employer, et cetera, et cetera. But again, it's another way of heightening their awareness of a particular employer, because this is sort of basic marketing 101. We're over communicated. It takes multiple messages for it to sort of break through your head. Even though you may be very receptive and you're looking for a job, you may not realize that, hey, that place would be a really great place to work. So it may take 4 or 5 times, and that's where job boards can really help us to go out and recommunicate. And then, of course, there's social media. All the job boards will do varying levels of social media for you. Depending on which job board it is, they get into Instagram, they'll get into Pinterest. You can tell how excited I am about all this stuff, but it does actually work. And all of them do LinkedIn and Twitter. Some of the job boards manage LinkedIn groups, and that can be a really effective way to network and find jobs.
Well, Jeff, thank you for joining us. How can people get in contact with you and learn more about what you do?
If you'd like to get in contact with me, the best way is to go to my website, jobboarddoctor.com. You can also reach me via email, thedoctor@jobboarddoctor.com. You can follow me on Twitter, jobboarddoctor. You can find me on LinkedIn under Job Board Doctor or Jeff Dickey Chasins. And if you can't find me any of those directions, you can actually use a search engine, type in Job Board Doctor, and if I don't come to the top, then you know I'm probably dead.
Well, we'll link to Jeff's sites, so you can just go to bloggingforjobs.com and then just go to the right-hand search bar and click in Job Board Doctor, and you'll have access to everything and all the sources and information that he's shared throughout this podcast. I want to thank you for joining us today, Jeff, and thanks to you for listening in. This is the Workology podcast, where we discuss the art and science of the workplace, HR, and recruitment. This is Jessica Miller-Merrill. Until next time, you can visit Blogging for Jobs to listen to all our past Workology podcast episodes.
Production services for the Workology podcast with Jessica Miller-Merrill provided by Total Picture Media.